it. Mike might have had jury duty, but he got out of it. So I'm very, I'm very excited about that one. So, like Mike mentioned, my name is Luis Torres, Polyverse Publications. We also have a nonprofit called bookchurch.org, which donates books and gathers them from around the community. Charles Healey here and I met after an article was done in the Santa Ynez Valley Star. So we're both Valley boys at heart, as Mr. Firestone would say. And we got together and he presented me with this wonderful opportunity, and I knew that we could do a really great job getting it out there. And so we decided to you reached out to me, we decided to talk about it, and you know, I don't remember if I told you this or not, but like maybe several weeks before we had spoken, I had a playwright who was working on a play called Rancho. And in that scene, it's an early like 1840. There's a character who's looking out at the islands. He gazes out and he says, you know, this would be a perfect place to raise cattle. And it was like, oh, that's a really great idea. And then maybe 2-3 weeks later, and I get in touch with Charles, and my eyes are opened to that very thing had happened over several centuries, I believe. We'll get more into that. But that very thing had happened, and so it was almost fortuitous that went down. So I guess that leads to my first question. So why was it Santa Rosa Island that was for cattle ranching?
Well, the other islands were used for cattle ranching too, but I think Santa Rosa was the most nutritious and most spacious of the islands because it has more space by longitude, more pasturing and less mountain range compared to other islands. And it was, I mean, all the islands were chosen as land grants because back in the day during the Mexican era of California, land was seen as power, and as if you got a land grant from the governor from the ruling party of Mexico, then that means you were pretty close. And so all the islands were divvied up as land grants, and Santa Rosa Island was made a land grant in 1843. So really there wasn't any purpose in seeing Santa Rosa Island as ranching. I mean, the greatness of it wasn't seen until people actually got there. It was just seen as, all right, we'll just make that land be given to that family, which was the Carrillo family in 1843.
Okay, and Carrillo like the street name.
Yeah, the two Carrillo brothers, Antonio and Carlos, they were sons of a soldier that came to California with Father Junipero Serra, and so they were local people, very important to Santa Barbara and to California in general, and they were friends with the current Alta California governor at the time, Manuel Mitchell Terrania, and he was the one that gave him the land grant to Santa Rosa in 1843.
Wow. So yeah, it's amazing how it all ties back. You know, you exit a freeway and you are on a road that's named after these families. So that's fascinating. If anyone hasn't seen the book, there's these beautiful images. It's a photo-based book. It's private collections of photographs from the families that were out there.
The Vale and Vickers era, 1901 to 1998, but there are pictures from 1998 to 2020 because my family were still able to go out there for vacations because we still had retired horses out there to take care of, and we were just allowed to go out there for summers.
So you mentioned the other families, and you mentioned your association with the island. So what was your association with the island and your family's association?
It was
with the
through
island?
my mother's family, the Smith family. From 1901 to 1998, the island was owned by Vale and Vickers, which was a cattle company back in the day, run by two very powerful cattlemen, John Von Vickers and Walter Vale. And they bought the island in 1901. And from 1901 to 1915, they had a foreman out there. But in 1915, a family problem came up, and so they were looking for a person to take that superintendent job. And at the time, my great-grandfather, Charles Wesley Smith, was working at the Vales Ranch in Arizona, the Empire Ranch, and he knew boats and he knew cattle very well. And so they asked him, could you go and take the position? And he said, I'll only take it for a year. But then when he got there, he decided to make it his home, and so the relationship of the island and my family started with my parents, with my mom's family, and then through my dad's family as well, because my dad's uncle, the brother to his mother, Bill Wallace, he went out there in the late 40s to just work as a simple cowboy, but then over time he became foreman as well in the 80s and 90s.
Okay. And you know, what's so fascinating about Santa Rosa Island is it's probably the one of the lesser known islands. You know, other islands you can go out there. I know you can camp there now, but you have to book a special permit and whatnot. Something that fascinated me personally about these islands are that your family had access to. You said that part of the impetus of coming from Arizona to work on the ranch was that he knew cattle, which there was, I believe, 7,000 head of cattle at one point.
The island could hold 7,000.
Which is amazing for
in a healthy term. I mean, you could stick more cattle in there, but that would just create destruction.
Right. Okay.
I mean, years before, like in the Moore era, which was from 1859 to 1901, they owned the island before Bell and Vickers. They were a brother company, the Moore brothers, and at the time in their era, they had about 2,500 cattle, but they had 80,000 sheep.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably not the best for the land. So when I talk about the amount of animals, I'm talking about what the island can hold, you know, in a healthy manner.
Yeah, in a sustainable manner. Okay.
And what we had out there. Yeah.
And then of course there was the aspect of the boating, which is critical to ranching on an island.
Yeah.
Tell us about the boating and how you would get the cattle from the island to the mainland.
Well, obviously cattle can't fly and they can't swim very far. So this happened back during the Carrillo era in the 1840s and 1850s. It was a big predicament to try and decide how to get animals out there, and so back in the day they had little schooners, like ships with masts and.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
okay, so like actual like
to
sailing
put
ships.
livestock and goods on, but they couldn't hold as much as current ships like the Vaquero 1 and Vaquero 2, which the Bell and Vickers owned. They were very large ships that can hold a lot of cattle. So they created the idea of cattle ships, and over time that was updated to be more modern, be more economically strong. And then before the first pier was built the first pier was built in 1844 on East Beach, because the Carrillos put the main ranch in the old ranch section. The old ranch section is on the east side of the island. It's very flat over there. But before any true pier was built, and any time when a storm would come and take a pier out, you would have to dump the cattle off the boat and make them swim towards.
So they would be
towards the land.
So you said they can't swim far, but that's amazing. Like,
and then when piers were constructed that could hold cattle, then you would put the cattle onto the pier and then walk onto the island. But of course, you know, storms have come through and taken the pier out.
Yeah.
And so you would have to just unload them in the water.
That's amazing. Yeah, the logistics of that are incredible. And I even saw that on the north side of the island. So my exposure, being born in Santa Barbara, I didn't know very much about this island at all. And I've never seen the far side, the side that's not the south side?
Yeah, that's what we call it.
Okay. And in the book, you know, there's an area that like a lot of ships were wrecking and sinking. I mean, could you see those ships? Could you see some of the wreckage? Or how did that?
You can see a little bit of the metal here and there. I mean, back in the day, you could really see it. Back in 1962, when the Chickasaw ship ran aground, which was a cargo ship, I mean, it was intact for a few years, just right there on the ground.
That's
and then
incredible.
Over time, the ocean would break it up, and then you would see, you know, the point of a boat sticking out, and then over time, it'd just be like metal.
Just get eaten away by.
I mean, I'm sure if you got into the water, you could see all those ships.
Wow, that's amazing. And so, you know, has anyone had a chance to go out to the island? You have?
Yeah, many times.
What was the why?
I mean, I think it's a privilege for us to live here and have these islands so close by, and I think it's a shame that people go their entire lives without seeing what's out there. And I've gone out with UCSB as a field station on Santa Cruz,
Yeah,
and
excellent.
so you can see the whole island that way.
Okay,
It's pretty amazing.
excellent.
And also Santa Rosa, I've been out with Channel Island Restoration. They go out there regularly, and yeah, it's amazing.
Okay, and that's so they do the classes and the restoration. I know that when ranching comes into an area, obviously you're going to be altering nature, but a lot of your book is actually focused on the nature of the island.
Mm-hmm.
You know, can you tell us a little bit about let's go with the pigs on the beaches. Let's go with that one. Can you tell us a little bit about that and maybe some other random things that?
Well, back before the Park Service closed the ranch and all the pigs were closed, there were wild pigs on the island, which were brought in, I want to say, 1854, brought over originally from Santa Cruz Island as a means of hunting and sport and meat. But then, as they grew wild and feral, they were really just a pest. And we try our best to exterminate them, but they
So man brings pig, and then pig
you can never get
goes
rid
wild.
of them. But anyway, so from the 1850s to 1998, and 1988 is when the Park Service sent hunters up there to eradicate all of them. They were just everywhere. And then when my parents were kids on the island, they would catch little piglets and make them as pets and train them. And
That's amazing.
like dogs.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they were everywhere. And then in the summer when it would get warm, they would look for cool places, and so they would actually go down to the beach and cool themselves in
That's
the water.
amazing. So they have a private
I
beach
thought it
resort.
was a cute picture, so I put it in the book.
Yeah, it's chock full of images of elephant seals and island foxes. So if you haven't had a chance to pick it up, it's an amazing book. These are all private collection photos, which is such a treat to see. Something about the pig stood out to me in my recent review of it. Actually, that they traded pork to another island for quail.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a lot? Did the different islands, kind of have their
Back
own?
in the day, you did trade goods and animals to another rancher, to another island, if you wanted something else as well. And in relation to that, the Wrigleys had Catalina Island,
Okay.
and at the time, and still now, they had rattlesnakes, and the rattlesnakes were such a terrible problem, so they decided to buy or trade pigs from the island from Santa Rosa and take them to Catalina to get rid of the rattlesnakes, and in turn, quail were brought over to the island in the early 30s as currency, or as like a gain for us.
In exchange.
Yeah.
Okay. How did the pigs deal with the rattlesnakes?
Eat them?
They just would eat.
I don't know. We just
That's
they were
fascinating.
traded.
Okay.
and-
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we're not-
we'll get off the nature. Another item that's so fascinating, I think, to a lot of us is that you lived on the island.
Vacationed.
Vacationed.
I didn't get to live on it.
Okay, but previous ranching families did live on the island, or
Yeah, my parents' era and the Valen Vickers era of the island, they lived on the island.
okay.
Yeah.
And there was the private airstrip,
Mhm.
which I think we all kind of think, wouldn't it be great to have our own private airstrip? So, can you? How did that work? Was it like handmade, or how did that even come into effect?
I think it was just chiseled out of the ground. Before a true airstrip was constructed, a plane would look for flat land
Dusty areas.
to try and land, and they used to land by the gum trees.
Okay.
And there's a gum tree line between the ocean and the barns, and they used to land right there. And I want to say the airstrip I think the airstrip was constructed in the late 30s, early 40s, because that's when the presence of planes was increasing. The first planes came in the mid-20s.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be a wild trip.
It's bumpy.
Yeah, like I could imagine,
you get over-
especially in the 20s and
you-
30s.
Yeah, and the plane rides I've been on too, you get past a certain peak on Santa Cruz Island on your way to San Jose, and all of a sudden the wind just begins, and you are being tossed around.
Wow. That's amazing. So I wanted to know, have you been out to the island since it became a national park?
Mm-hmm. I used to go out there for vacations because the lease was still running from 1998 to 2011. Cattle weren't allowed, but our presence and hunting elk and deer were still allowed, and we were able to go out there, and I was able to go out there and spend my summers out there. And then in 2011, when the lease ended, that usually meant our time had to end, but we still had horses out there. And my dad is a farrier, and he would go out there and trim the horses, so that still allowed us to go out there. And my mom's brother works for the National Park Service. He was a maintenance and mechanic man out there, but now he's a captain. But him being part of the Park Service allowed us to go out there as well.
So
But
you're
then
still tied to the island.
I mean, over time, it shrunk from a few weeks to a couple weeks to a week to maybe a few days until a day. And then the last time we were out there was December 26, 2020, to see the last horse, Sam.
Right.
And that day, we were only out there for a day, and the next day she died, and that was our. So
Yes.
our time is done.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, she
Um,
was 34. She was old.
Yeah, it wasn't. So you know, this book is it's near 200 pages of just fascinating material that we've been discussing, and there's no way we can really get to all of it. So I wanted to open up the floor and just see if anyone had a specific question, if anybody was interested in a particular aspect about the history.
How did you get access to all these photographs?
Well, the
Yeah.
photographs are within my family, just accumulated over time. All the black and white pictures from the early 1910s to the 1950s, 1960s, they were taken by my great-grandparents, and from the 1960s to the 90s, they were taken by my grandparents and my parents, and then from the 90s to that last day in 2020, my parents and also me took the pictures as well. So over time, they were just accumulated. I did have a few pictures from other people. About two came from a local photographer, Bill Dewey, which we know really well. And one picture, which is a picture of old mares in front of the East Beach marshland, was taken by another friend of ours, Karen Foster Wells, who was an artist, and she would go out there and paint. But most of them are from within my family.
It's amazing, it really is. Yeah. Anybody else?
Where did you launch from to come back and forth from the island to the mainland? I'm assuming cattle went that way also.
Oh, by boat with the cattle. Back in the day, from 1901 to the 1930s, they were unloaded at Stearns Wharf.
Really?
And then they were taken to our pier at Betcher's Bay, and then for some reason that whole changed, and then cattle were loaded and unloaded and taken to and from Port Hueneme and Ventura, and that
Wow.
stayed that way till the 90s.
So that's amazing. So we can imagine Stearns Wharf having cattle on it. It'll be very interesting next time I go out there and imagine that. That's fascinating. Yeah. Anybody else?
So what's out there now?
I mean, the barns are still out there, the houses are still out there, the fence lines and the water troughs, but of course with age and no use, they've kind of fallen apart. They're still standing, and all the items within the barns, such as the saddles and the horseshoes and the aprons, are still in there. But I mean, over time, it's just been
It's fascinating.
decaying.
Something really great too is that the Christman Center in Carpinteria is a special repository for items from the islands. And you've been working with Marla quite a bit, and so when it does open, it's basically a museum with a display dedicated to each of the islands. And for Santa Rosa Island specifically, Charles got me inside, and I got the VIP tour. But in the Santa Rosa Island display, there are original saddles from the family.
My dad's Uncle Bill, his saddle's in there, and then Nita, who's I consider as a family member to our family, her father's, which I call Uncle Al, his saddle's in there too, and Uncle Bill's saddle's right here, and then Uncle Al's saddle's right here, and they flank, and then there's elk antlers and deer antlers, and there's pictures, and there's a lifesaver or boot, or one of those flotation
Like
devices
the old-fashioned buoy.
from the Vaquero 2, which transported our cattle and other little goods and whatnot. And what's cool is that there is a little saddlebag my dad made when he was younger on Uncle Al's saddle. And I think they switched it to be on the side that you can see, which is good.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, any other questions?
Well, what's going on with the island now? What is it being used for?
The Park Service has it, and it's used for campers and I guess studying.
Yeah, for the
natural
UCSB and the restoration, right?
and then, in my opinion, going stale.
Well,
But
it's-
that's my opinion. So yeah.
Will they make a
I'll
museum
stop
of
at that.
it? Will they make a museum of it in any way?
They're trying to create museums and bed and breakfast kind of like events like that, but it's hard because it's an isolated island. It's hard to
Yeah.
get all of the necessary things out there.
Buildings and
the
up
barns-
to code now.
The barns are out there, but they're locked. And then Uncle Bill's house, which is by the bluff, that's blocked, and they don't know what to do with it. The bunkhouse is being used by the UCSB students when they go out there to study.
Okay.
And then the big house, which is the 2-story main house, that has just been redone and given a new foundation, and I think they want to use it for accommodation of some sort.
Interesting.
But I mean, I don't know. It's kind of just sitting
Yeah.
sitting there.
For us who don't know, it's just this beautiful island off in the distance from the shore, and this book has opened up my eyes to that, and I'm very excited about it. If there are there any other questions about it?
I'm interested, Charles, in what the big pull was for you to create this book. I know it's part of your family history, but I mean, how did it become such a passion project for you to develop this wonderful piece of?
Well, I think because when you look at books and media of that sort on the island, it's always from the viewpoint of the National Park Service and people of that era. So it's always them giving their opinions, and then they in turn put their opinions on us and say what the ranching side should say. And then I wanted to make this book to allow the ranching side to have a voice too, to have an equal opportunity to show our viewpoint, because before this it was just the Park Service and what they wanted to show, and then I wanted to give equal opportunity for people to still see the National Park Service side, but now to see the internal personal side from the ranching.
Well, look at it this
Yeah.
way, that if you didn't develop this, that history would have died with the ages. So
Yeah.
I don't think it would have died because, as you know, the museum's being
Yeah.
brought up, but I think it would just have been very secret and not that many people would have known. And so, I mean, eventually, without this book, it probably would have died with just the people who knew about it. So I guess this book would keep
We
it
wouldn't
going.
have seen all these amazing photos.
Well, yeah, it gives
Yeah.
it gives people outside its world to see it and enjoy
Yeah.
the pastimes of it.
We've there's so much to touch on with just the history. I mean, we could talk about the nature. We could talk about we didn't even get a chance to really discuss Native American anthropology on the islands or fossils or anything like that. Does anybody any questions, sir?
Do you touch on Arlington man or person, Arlington Springs?
Oh,
One reference, because there's a whole canyon called Arlington Canyon, but there's one section on you could say the north coast that faces Gaviota and Hollister. There's a section called Orr's Camp because back in the 40s to the 60s there was an anthropologist called Phil Orr who had a camp right on the bluff, and so I mentioned Arlington Springs Man because he lived out there on his camp and he discovered Arlington Springs Man. And so
Okay.
I mentioned it once because
yeah.
the place is named after him, and he did discover
What is
Arlington
it?
Springs Man. It is a skeleton of a Native American that is, I want to say, 13,000 years old, and apparently it was such a big deal because at the time, or still now, it was the oldest archaeological remnant of a person in North America. I'm sure that's probably changed with new discoveries, but it's up there
That's
with being the
fantastic.
oldest. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a history on the islands that we often forget about. both the ranching history and then of course this anthropological history as well. So, all right. So if there aren't any more questions, so this book has been really great for Santa Barbara in the area. Charles actually has been invited on several podcasts. There's been a few newspaper articles. There'll be a few museum events that are going on. When the Crispin Museum does open, there'll be an event there as well, and you can see the saddles. You can see the saddlebag we talked about. The Santa Barbara History Museum has invited Charles to do a virtual talk. So if we missed anything, or if you leave and you think, man, I should ask that question, there are chances for them to be answered later on. And then look for an article interviewing him in the Independent coming out. We think
Hopefully soon.
soon, maybe tomorrow, maybe a week from now. So there is going to be more information, and you know, we're working together, and Charles is doing a great job of bringing these stories and these details out into the community, and this is where to start. So yeah, if you have a book to get signed, why don't you, Mike, anything else? Charles, anything else?
I'm good.
Okay.
One more time for Charles.